Custom canvas prints are a great way to decorate your home, but they don't always come with a frame, and they look a lot better with a floating frame like this. So today, I'm gonna show you how to make this with inexpensive materials and only a couple of tools. Let's get to it. So a primary goal with this project is to use off-the-shelf material. So if you go to your local Lowe's or Home Depot, you should find in the lumber section a selection of what they call project boards. Now these are pre-milled, they refer to them as S4S, that's surfaced on 4 sides, and they're ready to go. The advantage is it's incredibly convenient. The disadvantage is that sometimes the boards are warped, you're kind of stuck with what they have, and if you want something that's a different measurement than what they provide, well, you're kind of out of luck unless you have the tools to cut them down. And we are going to run into that with the materials I've selected here. But there's also a problem with nomenclature. So if you look at this tag, for instance, we have a 1/2 inch by 3 poplar, but the actual dimensions are 1/2 inch by 2.5. This is what they usually call common or nominal terminology. So if you're looking at the 1/2 by 3, that's the nominal size, meaning like in name only. The actual size is 2.5 inches. Same thing with the 2x4. 2x4s are not 2x4. They're usually, 1 3/4 inches by 3.5, something like that. So it's just the way it goes. It's very confusing for new woodworkers. I totally get it. But the boards that I've selected here are 1/2 inch by again, selling it as 3, but it's actually 2.5. And then 1/4 inch, selling it as 2, but it's actually 1.5. We need 4 of each of those to get this done. All right, so the first thing we want to do is focus on these stickers. As stupid as it sounds, you really should be concerned about that. So it's not so much that the stickers are difficult to remove, it's more that when you do try to remove them just, with your fingernail or a putty knife, it takes a little while, it gets a little bit messy. You can very easily dent the wood in the process, and it's just not that fun. It also is going to leave a lot of residue. There we go. All right, so that's not ideal, but let me show you a slightly easier way to do this. If you have a heat gun or a hair dryer, it's not a bad thing to have in your shop anyway. Heat it up. I've got mine set to 500 degrees on the low fan speed. Just want to warm up the label. Just kind of reactivates the adhesive and makes it pull up a little bit cleaner. Oops. It's not always perfect, but the problem is the label also is like perforated. There we go. Now, either way, you're going to have residue here. The problem with this is we're not doing any milling on these. We're only going to be sanding. And if you sand that label, anyone who's tried that, you know what a gummy mess this turns into. So let's get around that with a little bit of solvent. I'm just going to use some denatured alcohol. Get some of this on a paper towel. And that should do a pretty good job of wiping up that residue, which will save us a lot of heartache later when we go to sand these pieces. Now remember I mentioned the disadvantage of being stuck with the dimension, right? So this is how these pieces for the frame are going to go together. Our skinny piece will be on the inside and make the sort of the back of this frame, and then the thicker piece will be the side. So when my artwork fits in here like so, we end up with way too much material. Now, I don't know, maybe you like that. I only went about 1/4 inch above my artwork here, so that's why we're gonna need to trim these down. I really was hoping to get the number of tools required for this project down to 1, but I just couldn't find the widths that I needed. So 2.5 has to come down to 2. Perhaps you find a source that actually sells the boards at 2 inches wide and you won't need the table saw. So yeah, speaking of that, let's go to the table saw. So I'll set the table saw for 2 inches. And we'll rip those guys down. Now take a look at each one of your pieces. One of these faces will be on the inside, the other will be on the outside. So in this case, for instance, this looks like the better choice initially because I don't have a knot, right? This little knot, we really would rather not have that on the outside. But the problem is when I look at the surface very closely here, I've actually got a lot of machine marks and some tear out. And I think that tear out is going to look a whole lot worse than this knot will, especially after I fill that knot. So let's use a little bit of CA glue. CA glue is just basically super glue. We use this a lot in the shop. And you could fill that knot. I'll do a little bit at a time, let it soak in. You could also use regular wood filler for something like this if you wanted to, but I find this to be a little bit faster. And if you're in a rush, speaking of fast, quick set activator works real nice, causes it to cure really quickly. Now I'm just gonna grab a little 120 grit sandpaper and make sure I clean everything up, get rid of all the machine marks, make it nice and smooth. Of course, a powered sander works really well too, but because these pieces are narrow, you may want to gang them together, especially when we're talking about our smaller, thin pieces. You just don't want to like round everything over and mangle these parts. All right, so I'm going to sand one face and then sand one edge. This is really one of the most important show surfaces. This is going to be the thing we look at that frames our artwork. So we're going to sand that nice and smooth. And that I do highly recommend you do by hand. And the skinny pieces don't really need too much work. That is really just the back. Never really going to see it. All right, so now we're going to glue our back strips to our side pieces. Of course, the pretty face, the one that we sanded that looks really nice, that's going to go down, and then this piece will be glued on like so. Now, gluing these together, as simple as this seems like it should be, can be quite vexing sometimes, because balancing this little piece on here and then applying clamping pressure without it just kind of buckling and folding over is a little bit tricky. So here's how I recommend you do it. We're going to put some glue on there. We will hold it by hand like this, and then use a quick clamp to hold it together, and then I can start adding my small F-style clamps. The reason you wouldn't necessarily want to, let's say we would just want it to go flush here. That's kind of what we want. That's the joint we want. The problem is most clamps, they have a center point of pressure, and especially with this little wobbly head on here, when you start to try to clamp this thing together like that, it's just never going to work. It's going to wind up folding it over like this because the center point is way too high, right? So that's why I recommend doing it the way I'm going to do it. The glue that I'm using is Type-On Speed Set. You don't have to use this, of course, but I like something that dries pretty quickly on a project like this because I want to move pretty quickly. And this is going to use quite a few of my small clamps, so I want to make sure I free them up as soon as possible. Okay, drop that on there. It's always good to kind of just give it a little wiggle, move it around, get as much air out of there as possible, and that's going to kind of help this stick while we move things around. Right, so when I lift it up, hand pressure, bring over my quick clamp because it's nice and easy. I suppose you could do this with a whole set of quick clamps if you have them, but what I'm setting up for is the ability to use these guys. And what I'm careful to do now is to center the screw on the center point of that thin piece, roughly. We could reposition these the more we get in place, but you see how this thing pivots, right? So unless you're right on that center point, it's always going to want to fall to one side or the other. As I start to apply this pressure, I'm also going to make sure we're going to stay flush here. So I can make a little adjustment and then tighten it down. There we go. Okay, now we can get rid of our quick clamp. Just clean up the glue with a wet rag. And then when I flip this guy over, we can clean out some of the squeeze out here. We definitely don't want that glue in that inside corner. And an old chisel does a good job with that. Set that aside to dry. 15-20 minutes with this glue is all we need. Now after the glue dries on these, you might want to just give them a little bit of a sanding. So hang them over a work table like this. And if there's any glue squeeze out or anything, go ahead and sand that. You could even sand the inside just a little bit if you want to. Just as a bit of a reality check here, double check yourself. This piece will sit inside like so. So our thicker piece is the outside wall, the thinner piece is the back. So this is what we're looking to do. And now you can see these pieces are very much oversized, right? Just that 24 inches happens to be very oversized for a 16-inch frame. And we're going to cut this to, I believe the number in the plans is 17.5, but you really just want to make sure you have the gap you want all the way around. And I would cut these a little bit long and maybe sneak up on it if you aren't sure, right? So let's head to the miter saw. All right, so at the miter saw, we're going to take our thicker sidewall piece, we're going to put that up against the fence, and then we're just going to make a 45-degree cut this way. So I want to make sure I'm going right to the end of the workpiece. take this guy over to 45. And if you have a clamping system, it's always a good idea to clamp these in place so you don't have to put your hands in the way. All right, so I'm gonna make this same cut on every one of the 4 pieces. You also want to double check if you have something that is a known 45-degree reference, you can double check and make sure that that is indeed 45.
Hi, I'm Caleb James. Welcome to my shop. Let me introduce you to our guild project. We have a whiskey cabinet that is masquerading as an end table. I like to call it the dry bar cube. It's got a unique little flip top here. It's a fun little project and one that's actually quite practical. It also features some very typical skills that you want to use in making casework, such as how to fit a drawer, how to fit butt hinges, nice and clean. I'll show you my method that makes that quite simple. We're also going to show you how to make lumber core panels. I use a very straightforward method, so we'll be making some of our own shop sawn veneer. It also features a lot of solid wood construction. These are all solid wood panels that come around the side, and we'll be focusing on making finger joint construction. A lot of times finger joints are limited to smaller projects, but I'm going to show you a method that I really enjoy using and works very well for larger pieces such as this one, or maybe a dresser, or maybe a credenza, or the like. And we're also going to explore some options on how we can make feet for our case pieces. There's a lot of skills to learn in this project, but honestly, I think you should build it because it's one of the funnest projects I've ever done when it comes to casework, and it won't take you a month of Sundays to complete. Find more information on thewoodwhispererguild.com.
Now to make the other miter cut, I'm just going to measure from that corner that we just cut into. Get my measurement of 17.5. Right about there. Now we're going to send the saw to 45 the other way, and this will allow me to continue to cut this in what I consider to be the safest orientation, like this. We could have cut on the other side, but we would have had to flip this guy over and cut it this way, which would have felt a little bit wonky to me. So let's get this guy lined up. Okay, once I got that lined up where it needs to be, I'm going to clamp it in like we did before. And now this is really important. We need a stop block. Now this is really dumb because I have T-tracks here. I just don't have the hardware, and I lost my little stop that I've been using. So just to get the job done, I just got a piece of scrap, double stick tape, and that will suffice as a stop. I'll just press it right against the workpiece, and that's good to go. All right, so let's just, kind of do a little dry assembly here just to see where we're at. It's always good to have these pieces just a little bit long so you can sneak up on the perfect fit. Sometimes what you think would look good, maybe it doesn't actually look good and you might want to take a little bit more off, but it's better than cutting too short. Oh yeah. Now we're getting there. That looks a little more consistent. It's about the gap that I'm looking for, so yes. All right, so now I'm feeling pretty confident with the measurements that we have. I'm going to get my speed set glue here and just apply some glue to this entire part of the miter. You know what, we've got some frayed material here from the miter saw. Let's get that cleaned up. Just don't want that preventing our miter from closing up. All right, away we go. I haven't talked much about the clamping system I'm going to use for this. There's lots of different ways you can clamp miters. Using regular clamps, especially on a shape like this, would be tricky, to say the least. I'm going to use a strap clamp. Lots of companies make these out of all kinds of materials, but the best one that I've found is called the Merrill clamp, named after the inventor's wife, I believe. whose name was Merrill. And you'll see why I like it in just a second. So get this roughly pre-assembled. So the Merrill clamp, let's bring it in. The reason I like it is it doesn't have a fabric strap like a bunch of the other ones do. It's got a metal strap. And then each one of these clamping heads has a little pivoting protective plastic piece. So you can kind of move the position around as needed. And then you simply tighten it down and start to tighten down the screw. And that will start to apply pressure in all directions on this thing. So as I start the pressure, I'm gonna make little adjustments as we take up all the slack. If I see my miters move, make a quick fix here, center my clamping head. Okay, looking good, looking good. A little more pressure. Now, here's the good news. If you're not great at miters, if your results here are a little bit gappy, well, you could always fill those gaps. Fill them with, you know, a hard setting glue. This particular type of glue has a lot of solids in it, so it will fill those gaps quite nicely, but you could fill it with wood filler, epoxy, whatever the heck you want to. And you're gonna sand it because you're gonna paint this, right? So it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but the more perfect it is, the less we have to worry about it. Okay, so what I'm looking for is nice, tight joints here on the outside. That's the most visible. Inside, I'm not so worried about that because we're never really gonna see it. But if we do have any kind of mismatches here, we don't want it to prevent our work, you know, the artwork from sitting down as far as it's supposed to go. So if you need to even things out, go ahead and push down if you need to. It's looking pretty good. So I think now we can just do a little bit of cleanup of that glue squeeze out. So as you can see, this clamp is pretty awesome. I'll put a link in the description if you want to pick one up, but it's a good investment. It's going to last you your entire woodworking career. Look who showed up. How lucky for us. Okay, yeah, you just lay in there because that's exactly what we were about to do. Good job. So at this point, you just want to kind of clean things up. If you feel a little bit of unevenness in your miter joints, get a sanding block. You can use a powered sander here, but I'd be really, really careful. It's so easy to round this stuff over. But just make sure you hit each one of those corners, flatten them out, clean them up so they're nice and smooth. Because we're painting, we're not so worried about sanding with the grain. Of course, if you have any glue squeeze out here on the outside corners, you're going to want to hit that with a little bit of sanding and just very slightly, just give a little bit of a round corner to that so it's not super sharp. But don't get crazy with it. Oh yeah, and if you do have gaps in your miters, this is a good time to throw some filler in there. That's real helpful, Oreo, thanks. Throw some filler in there and then sand it back as you prepare for finishing. Now on this inside edge and on this outside edge, we're gonna wanna add a little bit of a profile. You don't want it to be too sharp. So a good block plane is gonna do the trick here. There we go. You can certainly use a router here if you want to as well. Give it whatever profile you want. Round over, you could do chamfer. I'm just breaking the edge. Okay, and a light sanding will finish it off. Now on the inside here, you can get some of that with a block plane, but once you get to the ends, you're gonna have to do a little bit more of a manual process. And that's something I can do pretty easily with a sanding block. Okay, now we'll just repeat this on all four sides. All right, so the last thing we need to do before painting is drill a few holes. I just think it's easier to do now. We need holes in here that will allow like a simple, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch to a 1 inch screw to go through this piece and into the frame of the artwork. Now, if we think about the spacing, we have our sidewall, then we have about a 1/4 inch gap, and then we're gonna have a 3/4 inch, or maybe more, just depending on the frame, of material inside that framed artwork. So we have plenty of space to drive a screw there. I'm gonna measure in about 1 1/8 from the outside edge. That's where I'm gonna center my screw hole. This is the top. We're gonna be doing something different there. So yeah, I'm only doing this on the bottom and the sides. And you'll see why in a second. You could certainly put one at the top if you wanted to, but it really depends on the kind of hardware you're using. Up here, I will be using one of these little sawtooth hangers. So first, let me do the drilling on these 3. That's with a little countersink bit and a fairly large bit, because I don't want the screw to grab too much on the frame. I want it to grab the canvas frame. Now, there are, of course, all kinds of hanger systems, but I think a nice sawtooth hanger is pretty easy to install, fairly reliable on the wall, and all I need is one screw or a little monkey hook or something on the wall to do the attachment. So I'm just gonna line up my center little valley there with my center line. Get this guy spaced. Probably go at about 1 inch for this hardware, because these screws are actually long enough that they're gonna go through this and will also grab the artwork. So you don't have to do that, but it seems to make sense for me, so I'm gonna do it. Pencil line is gonna make this easier. Okay, so once that is centered and centered on my pencil line, just draw my drill location. Then I'm gonna drill a very fine hole. These screws, I do want them to grab this part of the frame. So this is just a little pilot hole. We're not attaching the hardware just yet, so we're gonna set this aside. Clean this up a little. Now we're ready to paint. All right, so normally something like this, little craft project like this, if I'm painting, I'm gonna use just some rattle can paint, and I would be doing this outside. The problem is it's actually raining outside today. So I've got my big garage door open. I'll do the spraying, and then I'm gonna just run a fan to get some cross ventilation in here. Very light coats is how I like to tackle this stuff. And it's gonna look a little uneven and splotchy at first, but after a few coats, it should look pretty good. Of course, I'll be wearing a respirator while I'm doing this as well. Right now, I'm not overly concerned about the back. I've got like a little bit of squeeze out. I mean, that's gonna face the wall, so not too fussed about it. And I really only put on what I would consider like my first coat on the sides. I'm gonna put more after I flip this guy over. And this is where I'm gonna be a little bit more, careful. I wanna make sure my sides look good. I want this top edge to look good. Dust isn't doing me any favors. Now this stuff dries pretty quickly. You can recoat it after about every minute or two. It says about 20 minutes before it's dried to the touch and another hour before you handle it. So we should be able to work with those numbers. All right, once the paint is dry, we can add the art to the frame, screw everything together. One quick note, if you see anything in the surface you don't like, if there's any roughness, you can definitely sand this. I'd recommend getting like a 320 grit, something like our backside sandpaper in 320 or 400 would work really well. Just give it a light sanding, smooth it out, remove the dust, and put your final coat of paint on. And that's gonna give you a more professional looking finish. All right, so let's get this guy in here. So the key is we wanna have it centered and we wanna be able to hold it in place while we attach the screws, which is a little bit tricky to do because we need to attach the screws from the back side, but we need to center it from the front here. So you can use something like these little shims as spacers, or you could just kind of eyeball it. And I find if I put my 2 fingers, pinch them in the corners like this, I could easily make adjustments in both directions and get this thing looking pretty good. And once you have it where you want it, pull it over the edge like this. And you're gonna grab a clamp, just a little bit of pressure holding the frames together. And I'm gonna go hit this corner. So spin it around. Okay, now this frame is pretty flat. I don't think we need to put them in the other corners. That should be good for now. Okay, and we'll flip it over. And well, you know what? We need another one because it's not gonna sit real well like that, is it? Sometimes it's the simple things. The simple things that mess us up. Now, while it might be okay to just drive those screws, at least these 3, I think we probably should put a little bit of a pilot hole in there. I don't want to crack the frame inside that canvas. Okay, we don't have to get nuts here. Not a lot of pressure on these screws. Okay, now let's get the sawtooth hanger in place. Yeah, baby. All right. There it is. Beautiful. All right, there you have it. Looking pretty good. Now, honestly, the only thing I might change is the paint. The thing is satin, like sheen, satin, flat, matte. These mean different things to different companies. So in my brain, satin was a little less shiny than this. So I have a little bit more sheen here than I really wanted, but it still looks pretty good. Next time I do it, I'll probably grab a can of what would be labeled as a matte paint. I think that would look a little bit better for something like this, but there's room for personal taste, right? So hopefully this makes a lot of sense. You'll be able to apply this methodology to any size canvas frame that you might have for any artwork you have in your home. Very easy to make, very quick to make. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Professional.
That looks better than store-bought.
That's so good.